My name is Shani Akilah, creator and co-founder of the Black and Brown Workers Collective.
And my name is Abdul-Aliy. I'm a co-founder of the Black and Brown Workers Collective.
Well, for us, I think direct action means directly confronting a system or reality that is in place that stops sort of equity or access to resources, for human beings. And so direct action has been our primary tool for engaging in the work of liberation.
I think, I was coming out of high school, so I was very young. And it was scary. It was scary seeing people in my neighborhood going into Iraq or preparing to go into Iraq, going into Afghanistan. I just remember having like a heightened sense of awareness around politics and what was happening globally.
I would say for myself, I think often when we think about our entry point into direct action, we think about these sort of structured ways or, kind of movements nationally that we then got plugged into. And that is also true for me. But I think my most honest response is, as a kid, I grew up in a violent household. And my first direct action was, as a child, disclosing to my mother that my father had molested me. And for me, that was the first time I had asserted my full humanity. As a child, I knew something was done that was not okay, and I responded to that. And so for me, that was the very beginnings of speaking directly to an abuse of power of some sort. What really made us vision the Black and Brown Workers Collective was the reality that the lived material conditions of what it means to be Black and Brown, and especially live on the margins, as LGBTQ folks, is that we really had no choice but to take action because nothing was going on that was protecting us from some of these abuses in these nonprofit, HIV/AIDS nonprofit institutions, to be specific. And so, something that has always brought Abdul and I and connected us and kept us connected is that we both have a very, very intuitive and deeply rooted commitment to walking in our full humanity and making sure that our community can also walk in their full humanity. That we want to be a part of creating a world where that is possible. And so, I think, a big part of this was just being incensed and outraged at the fact that we are expected to make ourselves smaller in order to have other people feel comfortable in sort of continuing to dehumanize people who are literally keeping their organizations up and running, So that for me was a big piece of it.
It was also spiritual too, like our connection and talking about ancestor and talking about Allah. I think for me it meant trusting the source and trusting that I needed to take action at this time. And I had no choice. Being someone who's HIV positive in the context of nonprofit work, made me see things that made it clear that these institutions don't serve us and that I needed to be a part of a movement to disrupt that.
So we have a platform for 2017. There are specific issues that we've been focused on, especially lately more than others. But right now, I would say that the bulk of our work has been focused on workers within the HIV nonprofit sector, specifically Mizoni, which Abdul, I think Abdul, I want them to really speak to that. They're a former employee of Mizoni and really led that campaign in many different ways.
Anti-blackness anywhere. Anti-blackness everywhere. Anti-blackness anywhere. It's anti-blackness everywhere. Anti-blackness anywhere. It's anti-blackness everywhere. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. To tell the rich child that he needs to go. To tell Dr. Robert Quinn that he needs to go. This is not business as usual. You will not sit here and wine and dine while Black and Brown community members starve for resources. You will not sit here and continue to abut us and eat.
So I think that, Mizoni Center and really sort of targeting doctors. Dr. Wynn, I feel comfortable to use these names because this has been public. There was a doctor at Mazzoni Center that was using quid pro quo policies, which, sexual favors for getting certain medications, and he was largely being aided and abetted in his actions because people knew, right? Nurit Shine, the CEO of Mazzoni Center, knew of this happening and turned her cheek. Also, though, right, one of our largest campaigns was against racism in the neighborhood. And one thing that we really brought to light was that a number of these nonprofits have CEOs and executive directors that not only don't reflect our community in the epidemic, but also don't seem to really think that racism is real or is something to pay attention to and to be accountable around. And so Nurit Shine made it evident that she was not at all invested in making sure that her practices were not anti-Black, right? We're making sure her practices were not perpetuating oppression within that agency. And so we made it a point to demand her resignation. And she has since resigned, right? And largely because of many things Abdul has done. So again, I'm sure they'll speak to this. But that's one of our major pieces. We focus on HIV/AIDS work. We focus on the socio-political causes, right? So we don't believe in our collective that HIV is because somebody, like Black and brown people are just getting HIV at the highest rates because we just don't know how to act, right? If you listen to some of these agencies, that's what you would walk away believing. But we know that when you have gentrification, when you have mass incarceration, when you have food deserts, there are things that make us more vulnerable to HIV than other groups. And so we focus on those things and raise consciousness around that. We're also doing a lot of work around becoming a cooperative. We believe that Black economic power is more than Black capitalism. We are not capitalists. We're probably African anarchists, probably, socialists in some way, a combination of those things. But we believe in building our own sovereignty outside of a capitalistic system so that we have economic power and political power.
I don't know. I trust that I'll be okay. I mean, I'm not trying to be a martyr. I'm very clear about that. I think we're clear in the collective that we're not. We determine the risk depending on what action, what demands we have, and it's not about this idea of being ready to die. But the system is ready to kill us anyway. So it's like, how do you confront the system in ways that make sense, right? Also understanding. That we want to live in a world that's liberated, right? I think that for me, that's how I deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think my comrade hit on all the major points. The only thing that I would say as well is that if we don't fight, we still will die. We still will be wiped out. And I think that the most recent healthcare bill really speaks to that. People that are supposed to be getting coverage really, are now being defined as pre-existing conditions, right? And so if you're HIV positive, if you're pregnant, if you've been raped, right, you are a pre-existing condition in this country. And so the way we see it is either we fight, and yes, there's a risk of being targeted and even being killed, or we don't do anything at all, we don't resist at all, and we still get wiped out. And so for us, it's kind of like a no-brainer. We'd rather resist with everything in our bodies to increase our chance of living.
Yeah, we were arrested last summer. We took over a highway over by Vine Street, the Vine Street Expressway. It was right after, I believe Alton Sterling had been murdered.
Should we be put in a position where standing against standing in justice results in an arrest, then that's what happens. But we also really believe that as Black and brown, queer and trans people, there's nothing particularly revolutionary about getting arrested. So we personally do everything in our power and our collective to decrease the chances of arrest.
I did, in the context of the platform against Mazzoni Center, I did a med strike, so I declined taking my HIV meds in order to put pressure on the CEO at the time, Nurit, and the board to have her resign. It lasted about 4 days. And at the middle of the fourth day, Nurit resigned, and so did the board president. Jimmy Ruiz. So that was the last direct action I was involved in.
I think one of the pieces of advice I would give to someone looking to be involved is that often we think that getting involved means getting arrested or organizing a huge protest. Getting involved can be looking at your own attitudes and belief systems and starting to really reflect on what it is you've taken in and started to believe based on what the world has taught you, right? And so, we talk a lot about accompliceship in our collective. While we are living on the margins as Black and brown LGBTQ folks, there's some ways each of us are privileged. I have privileges, right? And so often I'm thinking to myself, how am I using my privilege to interrupt somebody else's cycle of oppression, right? Not speak for them, but in what way can I act as a bystander who intervenes in something that I have the power to intervene in, right? And so as an able-bodied person, as someone who has light skin privilege, right? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about colorism in our community. Like, there's so many ways that I'm privileged, right? That if I just sit in that privilege and I don't think about how I too take part in oppressing others, then I'm in fact not revolutionary, right? I can't call myself an organizer if I'm not doing that internal work. So for me, like when I think about ways to get activated, it's to start there, right? Because often people get activated without doing that self-reflection. And so they end up getting involved in actually taking up space rather than supporting the liberation of a mass movement and people.
The other piece of advice I would give to people is to trust yourself, trust whatever source you rely on for guidance, because there will be moments where people will gaslight you and say that what you're doing isn't productive. They'll say you're being divisive for calling out anti-Blackness, but just trust that what you're doing is aligned with your values and connected to that work that Shani was talking about.